Hey there, it's Gabriel, and this is an opportunity for me to share with you who I am. The question of what kind of therapist are you, or who are you, what brought you into therapy, do you have any background that connects to my background? Those are questions that I have all heard before, and I'm going to try to basically do a frequently asked question about me for you. So I'm going to kind of start where I am at now and work my way in reverse. And there will be a point where I'll move out of me as a therapist and into some of the previous job training that I've had, and then even some of my experiences as a survivor of trauma as a kid. But I just want you to know that when I get candid, I'm not going to go deep into it because this is not my therapy. This is your therapy. And anything that I share with you is just to give you some information on some of the things that I have been through in a real life scenario, so that you know that what brought me to becoming a therapist were things that were important along the way. So let's just begin with the therapist part. As a therapist, I have been working as a therapist since 2018. I studied with my primary focus while working in my internship with veterans returning from combat duty in San Francisco at the Veteran Affairs. And I loved my work there, mostly in groups, and I am both a therapist and an art therapist, so I was running art therapy groups on the inpatient unit. A lot of those clients are suffering from things like really severe PTSD, really severe anxiety and panic attacks, a lot of psychosis, and a lot of mood disorders, mostly in the bipolar area with like a manic episode happening. So I have a lot of experience with that in my original training. As a therapist, I have been working predominantly with individuals with psychosis. So that would include schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, and bipolar with psychosis, and then also anxiety, depression, suicidality. So from 2018 to now, that's been a big chunk of my focus. Within that, the age groups that I've worked with, the youngest client that I've ever had was 6 years old, and the oldest client that I ever had was 92 years old as a therapist. But most of my work has been with transitional age youth. So that number, if you don't know what that is usually starting around the age of 13, 14, 15, up to about 23, 24. And transitional age youth usually encompasses that period where your brain is really figuring out all of its high-end function, the big things that we have to overcome as a teenager or as a young adult in our 20s to get to the point where we mellow out as an adult are kind of happening in there, and the emotions are raw, they're brand new, they're taking on new levels. So I've worked a lot with what we would often say are kids, teens, adolescents, young adults. But I have also worked in my capacity as a therapist with seniors for many, many years in tandem. While I'm working with adolescents, I'm working with seniors, and then adults. So across the spectrum, I feel very comfortable working pretty much with anybody at any age. And I don't like to say that I have any one particular specialty. I work with humans. So that brings us through me as a therapist and kind of like the way that I work. I will be tough with you, but I will also be very compassionate. I'm very empathetic. I listen, and I work with you session by session to try to get to the points that I'm hearing you tell me that you want to work on. And if those are things that are meaningful for you, then we kind of pull them all together and then triage them. What is the thing that you want to work on the most? And if it feels like that thing has smaller things within it, then we'll granulate it down. It's really about what can we get our arms around. I often work with people that come in with a really, really big problem, and that problem can actually be brought down into subsets of smaller problems. And when you pull that little piece out, everything seems to feel much less grand in the burden that comes in as a struggle. Not every time, but a lot of times in my experience. So before I was a therapist, I was an inpatient psychiatric nurse, and I worked in that capacity for 9 years. And that really is where the kind of idea of becoming a therapist came in. I loved the role as nursing, but in an inpatient setting, it can be very rigorous. And there was a point where I just really felt that it wasn't a good fit for me as the workload in the physical part of it. But I loved talking to people. I loved having that connection that created. And it was the therapist that said to me, you know, Nurse Gabriel, you would be a good therapist. And so that's when I made that transition out. But that gives me about 9 years of working with really intensive cases. And in those cases, drug addiction, depression, suicidal thoughts, bipolar disorder with like a manic expression, psychosis, all of those things. That's 9 years of work that I had working with just people who were struggling with the biggest struggles, like to the point where you go into a locked facility. So that's what brought me into therapy. So I have a real big heart to work with individuals. If that's something that you've had in the past and you're now coming to me, no problem, I can deal with it. So what brought me into nursing? Well, I kind of jokingly will say that it was a lateral move, but I spent 17 years of my life working in the bar industry. So that was bars, clubs, mostly as a bartender, often as a manager. And there is just, again, this part where you, on slow nights, are talking to people. And many people have like this old tropey joke about the bartender being that kind of therapist role. And I'll be honest, it was. I never thought about it that way, but all those years, someone bellies up and I'm helping them. Why did I leave? Well, seeing a lot of people in that addiction space just wore on me over time, and I wanted to flip, and that's what brought me into nursing, working in a capacity where instead of providing the person with the drink, I was helping the person with the drinking problem. And that was a real healing part of the work that I did in that transition from 17 years in the bar industry to 9 years as a nurse. So this is where I get candid. Here we are. We're kind of at the teen years and we're going to go back. But just really quickly, I'm going to say, if you don't want to know this part about me, stop right here and we're done. But I do have clients that want to know a little bit about who their therapist is. Not everyone does. So this is that point where you get to stop. If you're still with me, no triggers. These are just the real basic nuts and bolts. But some clients actually want to know a little bit about their therapist. And I'm a therapist that believes that it's important to actually share. That old Sigmund Freud kind of way of the therapist being this blank slate and they're just this person that you know nothing about. It never worked for me in therapy. I actually have to have that connection. If I feel like the person is actively trying to hide big chunks of their life from me, it feels a little bit weird. So I'm going to give you the basics. Again, no big stuff, but I came from pretty extreme poverty. I'm a child of divorce. That divorce happened at a very, very young age, and I had a stepfather who was a very horrible person. In that time with the person that was my stepfather, there was physical abuse, there was emotional abuse, there was witnessing of abuse, there was domestic violence, there was drug abuse, both with me as a child and with the people in the family. Drugs were a big part growing up in that world. And also there was neglect. So all of that ended when I was about 13 years old, going into 14 years old, and I transferred into a situation that was an agreed foster, not a court-ordered foster, and I lived with a family that was really great. My experiences in that particular foster scenario were wonderful. I have nothing bad to say about that particular experience. As a teen, I really struggled with a lot of anger issues, the way that I had been raised and the kind of environment that I was raised in. This very aggressive male attitude had been taught to me by the men from that culture. And I bought into it because I didn't know anything better. And I struggled with that as I kind of came out of it. And I had this wonderful family basically say, that's not going to work. And I agreed. So coming through that, I was put into therapy, and that was my first interaction. And at first I was resistant, as many teens are. I had this attitude of like, I am not broken. I don't need to be fixed. I don't like the person across from me. I didn't even know them, but I ended up with some really good therapists. And I'll be honest, it really saved my life. It reduced a lot of the anger issues that I had as a teen, that many teens have. It reduced a lot of the self-destructive things that I had in my life. It really challenged me to think about how I felt like I wasn't worth anything, as many trauma survivors struggle with that. And it was just this thing that stuck with me, where all the little techniques that I picked up as an adolescent going into an adult really helped over and over and over again reduce self-destructive behaviors, increase the amount that I was able to care about myself, increase the capacity for me to draw towards me healthy people rather than toxic people. And I won't say that I got it right every time, but I always reflected back to those moments as a teen where I was put into therapy for some of the stuff that was coming up and how that really helped me out. So that's just a really brief that I have experience within that. And that's experience in addiction. So if you have an addiction, I understand. I have it in my family. I have had very close family members die from their addiction in my family and watch the real life struggle from it. I've also had really close members of my family survive addiction. So whichever one is the one that you may be dealing with, like I've had some experience with that. Neglect, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, all of those things. I witnessed it as a child, experienced it as a child, have healed through it as a teen and into my adulthood, and it's what brought me to where I am today. I do the work because I have done the work. So I hope that this has been informative for you. As always, if you have any questions or if you want to know more, please don't hesitate to ask, and I'll always be very straightforward with you. I hope this gives you a little feel for who I am, my approach, and what it'll feel like when you're working with me in therapy. So if you have any other questions, allrisetogethertherapy.com is a place. Go in there, click contact. It'll send me an email. It also has my phone number that you can reach out. If you want to set up a scheduled appointment for an interview, we can do that. And then this is my YouTube, which you're probably watching right now, which is also my Instagram. If you want to follow, go ahead, give me click on the subscription and a like. And I thank you very much for your time.